My name is Evelyn, and I was 36 years old the morning I realized my husband was treating my family's legacy like a cheap hotel. Richard had always been a man who craved the spotlight. He was loud, effortlessly charming, and believed that looking wealthy was far more important than actually being wealthy. When he smiled and handed me the brochure for an exclusive, weekend-long spa retreat, telling me I worked too hard and needed to relax, he thought he was executing a brilliant manipulation. He thought I would pack my bags, kiss him goodbye, and disappear for 3 days, leaving him with the keys to my private estate. He did not know that I had already found the catering bill on his desk. And he certainly did not know that the dress I was packing in my luggage was not meant for a quiet dinner at the spa, but for the destruction of his entire public life. Welcome to Quiet Karma Stories, where the loudest betrayals are met with the coldest revenge, and ordinary people discover exactly what they are capable of when pushed past the point of breaking. If you are the kind of person who believes that true justice does not need to shout to be heard, you are in the right place. Drop a comment to let me know you are here, and be sure to subscribe. To understand why Richard's betrayal was so profound, you have to understand the estate. The property had been in my family for 3 generations. It was a sprawling, stone manor sitting on 20 acres of pristine, heavily wooded land just outside the city. It was not just a house, it was a sanctuary. After my parents passed away in a tragic accident when I was 25, the estate became the only physical connection I had left to them. I was the sole heir, the quiet custodian of a massive family trust. I did not care about showing off. I spent my days managing our philanthropic foundation, working quietly in the background while the world spun around me. Richard was the exact opposite. He was a junior executive at a marketing firm when we met, a man whose ambition constantly outpaced his bank account. After we got married and he moved into the manor, his entire personality shifted. He began acting less like a partner and more like a feudal lord who had just conquered a castle. He hosted lavish, loud dinners for his colleagues, pouring my father's vintage wines and acting as if he had earned every stone in the driveway. I tolerated his arrogance because I loved him, or at least, I loved the version of him he had presented to me during our first year together. I thought his need for attention was a harmless insecurity. I was wrong. The illusion finally shattered on a Thursday morning in late September. Richard was downstairs in the solarium, having his morning coffee and loudly complaining on a conference call. I was upstairs in our master suite, packing a small bag for the spa weekend he had so generously booked for me. It was uncharacteristic of him to be so attentive to my stress levels, but I had been dealing with a difficult audit at the foundation, and I genuinely believed he was trying to be a supportive husband. I needed to find my favorite silk robe, which had somehow gone missing from my closet. Assuming Richard might have tossed it into the laundry basket in his home office, I walked down the hall and opened his door. The robe was not there. But something else was. Richard was usually meticulous about hiding his financial maneuvers, but arrogance makes people sloppy. Resting openly on the center of his mahogany desk was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed logo of the most expensive event planning and catering company in the city. I am not naturally a suspicious person, but the sheer cost associated with that company caught my attention. I walked over to the desk and slid the heavy paper out of the envelope. It was a final, itemized invoice. The total cost was staggering, pushing past $40,000. My eyes scanned the line items. Champagne towers. A 5-course plated dinner for 60 guests. A live jazz band. A custom-built dance floor to be installed over the rear patio of my estate. And then I saw the date. The event was scheduled for this coming Saturday. The exact day I was supposed to be receiving a hot stone massage 200 miles away. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the top of the invoice, at the section designated for the event description. It was written in elegant, cursive script. A surprise 30th birthday celebration for Chloe. I stared at the name. Chloe. I did not know a Chloe. I did not have any friends or family members named Chloe. But Richard knew a Chloe. She was the new, 20-something receptionist at his marketing firm. I had seen her once at a company holiday party, a girl who looked at my husband with a mixture of absolute adoration and thinly veiled greed. The reality of the document hit me with the force of a physical blow. Richard was not sending me to a spa because he cared about my stress. He was exiling me from my own home so he could throw a massive, $40,000 birthday party for his mistress at my private estate. He was planning to parade her around my house, drink my wine, and play the role of the wealthy benefactor in front of 60 guests, all while the quiet, boring wife was safely out of the picture. I stood in the silence of his office, the heavy cream paper trembling slightly in my hand. Most women would have marched downstairs immediately. They would have slammed the invoice onto the glass table in the solarium, screaming at him to pack his bags and get out. They would have cried, demanded an explanation, and allowed the sheer emotional weight of the betrayal to dictate their actions. But I am not most women. The shock in my chest rapidly cooled, hardening into a sharp, crystalline focus. I did not scream. I did not cry. I carefully took out my phone and photographed every single page of the invoice. Then, I placed the document exactly where I had found it, aligning the edges perfectly with the corner of his desk. Richard thought I was a naive, quiet woman who would simply fade into the background while he gave my life away to someone else. He was about to learn that quiet people are the most dangerous enemies you can possibly make, because we do not announce our moves. We simply make them. The physical act of zipping a suitcase closed has never felt so heavy. I stood in the master suite, staring at the canvas weekender bag sitting on the foot of our bed. It contained everything Richard thought I needed for 3 days of absolute relaxation. Cashmere sweaters, comfortable leggings, and a bathing suit. It did not contain the anger that was currently burning a hole through my chest, nor did it contain the photographic evidence of the $40,000 catering bill currently sitting in the encrypted folder on my phone. I took a deep breath, smoothing the expression on my face. I needed to look tired. I needed to look exactly like the overworked foundation director Richard believed he was managing so brilliantly. I picked up the bag and walked downstairs. The morning light was pouring through the massive windows of the solarium, casting a warm glow across the imported Italian tile. Richard was still sitting at the glass table, his phone pressed to his ear, projecting the image of a titan of industry. When he saw me, he held up a finger, signaling the person on the other end of the line to wait, and muted the call. He stood up, adjusting the collar of his designer shirt, and walked over to me with a devastatingly handsome smile. "Are you all packed, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with practiced affection. I nodded, allowing my shoulders to slump slightly, leaning into the role he had written for me. "Yes. I am exhausted, Richard. You were right. This spa weekend is exactly what I need to recharge. Thank you for setting it up." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. The smell of his cologne, a scent I had bought him for our anniversary, suddenly made me nauseous. He kissed the top of my head. "You deserve it, Evelyn. You do so much for everyone else. Just go turn your phone off, get a massage, and do not worry about a single thing here at the house. I have everything under control." The audacity of the statement was almost breathtaking. He had everything under control. He had the caterers booked, the jazz band scheduled, and the mistress waiting in the wings. "I love you," he said smoothly, stepping back and looking into my eyes with a flawless counterfeit of sincerity. "I will see you on Sunday," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. I walked out the heavy oak front doors of the manor, down the stone steps, and climbed into my car. I did not look back at the house. I put the car in drive and guided it slowly down the long, tree-lined driveway, waiting until the iron gates closed behind me before I allowed my hands to start shaking. The drive to the resort took 4 hours, winding through dense mountain roads that offered no cell service and absolute isolation. I drove in complete silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not listen to a podcast. I needed the quiet to process the magnitude of the disrespect I had just uncovered. Betrayal is rarely just about the physical act of cheating. The physical act is painful, yes, but the true devastation lies in the logistics. It is the realization that the person you share a bed with has spent weeks, or even months, actively plotting against you. Richard had not just slipped up in a moment of weakness. He had researched catering companies. He had coordinated a guest list. He had looked at his calendar, realized I was overwhelmed with work, and weaponized my exhaustion to create a window of opportunity. He was going to bring a 20-something receptionist into my home. He was going to let her walk across the hardwood floors my grandfather had laid. He was going to let her sleep in the bed I had purchased. The betrayal was not just a violation of our marriage, it was a desecration of my family's legacy. By the time I reached the luxury spa resort, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long, purple shadows across the manicured lawns. The resort was designed to be a haven of absolute tranquility. There were fountains trickling in the lobby, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus drifting through the air, and staff members who spoke in hushed, soothing tones. The contrast between the serene environment and the absolute war zone inside my head was almost comical. I checked in at the front desk, accepting a glass of cucumber water from a smiling concierge, and followed a bellhop to my private cabin at the edge of the property. It was a beautiful room, featuring a stone fireplace, a massive soaking tub, and a balcony overlooking a pine forest. The bellhop set my bag down, bowed politely, and closed the door behind him. I was finally alone. The isolation of the cabin was exactly what I needed. It was my refuge, the staging ground where I could finally drop the mask of the exhausted wife. I walked over to the minibar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and sat down at the small writing desk near the window. I took my phone out of my purse and opened the photo gallery. I stared at the catering invoice again. The total amount, the date, the guest of honor. Chloe. I knew that if I wanted to destroy Richard completely, I could not rely on a single piece of paper. An invoice was proof of a party, but a skilled liar could spin it. He could claim it was a surprise party for a client, or a corporate event that he had forgotten to mention. I needed irrefutable, devastating context. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I amputated the limb. I opened my laptop, connected to the resort's secure Wi-Fi network, and prepared to dig into the digital nervous system of my own home. The estate was equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. It was installed shortly after my parents passed away, a necessary precaution for a 20-acre property that housed valuable art and historical artifacts. There were cameras covering the perimeter, the gates, the driveway, and several of the main interior living spaces, including the solarium and the main hallways. Richard hated the interior cameras. He often complained that they felt invasive, claiming that a man's home should be his private sanctuary. To appease him, I had promised to deactivate the interior feeds shortly after we were married. I told him I had disabled the internal network, leaving only the exterior cameras active for security purposes. I lied. I never disabled the interior cameras. I simply removed the viewing application from the main household computer and routed the encrypted feed directly to a secure server managed by the family trust. I did not do it because I suspected him of cheating. I did it because the estate was a historical asset, and my obligation to protect it superseded his desire for absolute privacy in the solarium. For 3 years, I had never once logged into the interior feeds. There had never been a reason to. Until now. Sitting in the quiet isolation of the mountain cabin, I opened the secure portal on my laptop and typed in the administrative password. The screen blinked, loading a grid of 16 high-definition camera feeds. I clicked on the Archive tab and began filtering the footage, starting with the previous month. I isolated the dates and times when I was scheduled to be out of the house, attending long board meetings for the Philanthropic Foundation or flying out of state for charity galas. It did not take long to find what I was looking for. I opened a file dated exactly 3 weeks prior. I had been in New York for a 3-day conference. The timestamp on the video was 8 in the evening. The camera in the main hallway showed the heavy oak front door opening. Richard walked in, laughing loudly, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a young woman with long blonde hair. It was Chloe, the 20-something receptionist from his firm. I watched the screen, my heart beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. Seeing the physical proof of the affair was painful, but it was a familiar, predictable kind of pain. Men cheat. Men bring women into their homes when their wives are away. It is a cliché as old as time. But as I kept watching, the cliché morphed into something far more disturbing. Richard did not just bring her into the house for a secret, shameful rendezvous. He was giving her a grand tour. He was walking her through the solarium, gesturing grandly to the imported tile and the vaulted ceilings. He led her into the formal dining room, opening the antique glass cabinets and pouring them both a glass of wine using my grandfather's crystal decanters. He was not acting like a man sneaking around. He was acting like a wealthy patriarch showing off his kingdom. I scrubbed forward through the footage, jumping to the camera positioned in the upstairs hallway, just outside the master suite. 30 minutes later, the bedroom door opened, and Chloe walked out. My breath stopped. She was not wearing her own clothes. She was wearing my favorite silk robe, the exact robe I had been searching for that morning. She was parading up and down the hallway, spinning around to make the silk flare out, laughing hysterically. Richard leaned against the doorframe, holding a glass of wine, smiling at her with an expression of absolute adoration. I turned the audio feed up, the sound of their voices filling the quiet cabin. "You look incredible in that," Richard said, taking a sip of his wine. "Much better than she does. She makes everything look so boring." Chloe laughed, running her hand along the silk lapel. "Are you sure she will not notice it is gone?" "She never notices anything," Richard scoffed, rolling his eyes. "She is completely oblivious. She lives in her own little world of spreadsheets and charity dinners. Do not worry about it. Keep it. Think of it as an early birthday present." I sat frozen in the wooden chair, the glowing light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. The betrayal was not about sex. It was about replacement. Richard resented my wealth, my independence, and my quiet authority over the estate. He could not dominate me, so he had found a younger, naive girl who looked at him exactly the way he wanted to be looked at. And he was using my money, my home, and my literal clothes to play the role of the billionaire sugar daddy. He was essentially practicing for the day he could push me out and install her as the new lady of the manor. The lavish birthday party he was planning for Saturday was not just a celebration, it was a coronation. He wanted to introduce her to his friends, in my house, establishing her dominance while I was safely tucked away in the mountains. A profound, absolute disgust washed over me, completely erasing whatever residual affection I still held for the man I had married. I did not close the laptop. I opened a massive external hard drive and began downloading every single video file that contained Chloe's face. I downloaded the footage of her drinking from my crystal, wearing my clothes, and sleeping in my bed. I downloaded the audio files of Richard mocking my intelligence and giving away my possessions. I spent 4 hours meticulously compiling a digital library of his arrogance. By the time I finished, the sun had completely set, plunging the pine forest outside my balcony into total darkness. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. I had the catering invoice, and I had the security footage. The emotional shock was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, calculating logic of a woman who managed multi-million-dollar trusts for a living. Richard thought I was a boring, oblivious obstacle. He was about to find out that the obstacle was actually a brick wall, and he was currently driving toward it at 100 miles an hour. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the drive and the digital excavation of my home finally began to wear off around midnight. I closed the hard drive, unplugged it from the laptop, and placed it carefully into the hidden compartment of my travel bag. As the glowing screen went dark, the silence of the mountain cabin rushed in, filling the space with an unbearable, heavy reality. I was alone. I was profoundly, terrifyingly alone. The cold logic that had guided me through the afternoon vanished, leaving behind the raw, bleeding wound of betrayal. I walked over to the edge of the bed and sat down. For a long time, I just stared at the stone fireplace, watching the last embers of the logs burn down to gray ash. And then, I broke. I did not cry gracefully. I collapsed onto the thick mattress, burying my face in the pillows, and let out a sound that I did not know my body was capable of producing. It was a guttural, wretched sob, born from the absolute destruction of the future I had built in my mind. I wept for the man I thought I had married. I remembered our wedding day, standing in the manicured gardens of the estate, surrounded by friends and family. I remembered the way Richard had looked at me when he recited his vows, promising to protect me, to cherish me, to be the partner I could rely on after losing my parents so young. It had all been a performance. A calculated, masterful performance by a man who saw me not as a wife, but as an acquisition. He had looked at my grief over my parents and seen an opportunity. He had looked at my quiet nature and seen a weakness he could exploit. I cried until my throat burned and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for the wasted years, for the compromises I had made to accommodate his ego, and for the humiliating reality that he had been laughing at me behind my back with a receptionist who was barely out of college. I allowed myself to feel every ounce of the pain. I did not try to push it away or rationalize it. I let the grief wash over me like a dark, freezing wave, pulling me under. But grief, like any storm, eventually runs out of energy. Sometime around 3 a.m, the tears simply stopped. My breathing slowed, the ragged sobs giving way to a hollow, exhausted silence. I laid in the dark, staring up at the wooden beams of the cabin ceiling. The illusion was dead. Richard the loving husband did not exist, and mourning a ghost was a waste of time. I slowly sat up, my muscles aching from the tension. I walked into the massive bathroom and turned on the faucet of the soaking tub, letting the hot water fill the porcelain basin. I stripped off the clothes I had worn during the long drive and stepped into the water. The heat enveloped me, relaxing the tight muscles in my shoulders and neck. I submerged my head completely, letting the quiet roar of the water drown out the world. When I resurfaced, I took a deep, steadying breath. Acceptance is a very strange mechanism. It is not necessarily peaceful, it is simply factual. I accepted that my marriage was over. I accepted that my husband was a parasite. And I accepted that he was currently in my home, preparing to throw a $40,000 party with my money for another woman. I stepped out of the tub, wrapped myself in a thick, white towel, and stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at me was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but her expression was entirely different. The devastation was gone, replaced by a sharp, flinty resolve. I walked back into the main room of the cabin and turned on the small desk lamp. I pulled a leather-bound notebook and a pen from my purse and sat down. If Richard wanted to play the role of the ruthless conqueror, he was going to learn what an actual war looked like. I was not going to hire a mediator. I was not going to sit across from him in a therapist's office and listen to him cry and apologize. I was going to surgically dismantle his life. I wrote down my primary objectives in neat, methodical handwriting. 1. Immediate extraction. Richard needed to be legally and physically removed from the estate without warning. 2. Financial isolation. I needed to ensure he could not touch a single dime of the family trust or our joint accounts to fund his exit or his new life with Chloe. 3. Public execution. He had chosen to humiliate me in my own home, surrounded by his friends and colleagues. Therefore, the consequences of his actions needed to be delivered in the exact same setting. I looked at the clock on the bedside table. It was 5 a.m. on Friday. The party was scheduled for Saturday night. I had exactly 36 hours to turn a mountain of digital evidence into a lethal legal weapon. I closed the notebook, walked over to the bed, and pulled the heavy blankets over me. I needed sleep. Tomorrow, I had to make the most important phone call of my life. I woke up at 8 o'clock the next morning. The mountain air filtering through the open balcony door was crisp and freezing, but I felt entirely awake. The heavy, suffocating fog of grief that had paralyzed me the night before was completely gone, replaced by a crystalline, almost dangerous clarity. They say that healing takes time. They say it requires therapy, long walks in nature, and months of journaling to process the trauma of betrayal. But I have always found that the fastest way to heal from being a victim is to completely destroy the person who victimized you. Action is the ultimate antidote to despair. I made a cup of black coffee in the small kitchenette of the cabin, opened my laptop, and dialed the private cell phone number of Victoria Sterling. Victoria was the lead attorney for my family trust. She was a woman in her late 50s who wore tailored gray suits and viewed human emotion as a temporary inconvenience that stood in the way of billable hours. She was ruthless, brilliant, and terrifying. She was exactly what I needed. She answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Evelyn. Are we having an emergency, or are you calling to review the quarterly tax filings?" "I am calling to initiate a divorce," I said calmly. "And I need an emergency eviction notice drafted and executed by tomorrow evening." There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the sound of a pen clicking, followed by the rustling of paper. "I have my notepad," Victoria said, her voice dropping into a tone of pure, predatory focus. "Tell me everything." I spent the next 40 minutes walking her through the events of the previous 24 hours. I told her about the fake spa weekend, the catering invoice for the $40,000 birthday party, and the encrypted security footage of Richard parading Chloe around my estate in my silk robe. When I finished, Victoria let out a low whistle. "Well, he is certainly not winning any awards for subtlety. Or intelligence. Can we evict him immediately?" I asked. "I do not want him spending another night in my home." Victoria did not hesitate. "Your grandfather was a paranoid genius, Evelyn. The prenuptial agreement Richard signed specifically states that the estate remains your sole and separate property. Furthermore, there is a morality clause regarding the use of the property for unauthorized commercial or large-scale events without the express written consent of the trust. By attempting to host a 60-person catered event using trust funds without your signature, he has fundamentally breached his residency agreement." She paused, the sound of her typing echoing rapidly over the phone. "I will draft a formal notice of immediate eviction. We will cite the unauthorized event, the misuse of property, and the attempt to establish residency for an unauthorized third party, being his 20-something receptionist. The local sheriff's department works closely with our firm on estate matters. I can have deputies on standby to enforce the eviction if he refuses to leave." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my shoulders. "What about the finances?" "I am freezing all joint accounts immediately," Victoria replied. "He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee using your money, let alone pay a catering company $40,000. The invoice you found is in his name, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Excellent," she said, her voice practically vibrating with satisfaction. "Then he is personally liable for the debt. The catering company will go after him, not the trust. He is going to have a very difficult time explaining why his credit cards are suddenly declining while 60 guests are waiting for champagne." The strategy was flawless. Victoria was not just preparing legal documents, she was building a cage. Every move Richard had made out of arrogance was going to be weaponized against him. "I will have the divorce papers and the eviction notice ready for your signature by noon today," Victoria concluded. "How do you want to handle the delivery?" "I can have a process server meet him at his office this afternoon." "No," I said softly, looking out the window at the dark pine trees. "If we serve him at his office, he will have time to spin the narrative. He will call his friends, play the victim, and try to make me look like a hysterical wife. I do not want him to have a single second to prepare." "Then when do we strike?" Victoria asked. "Tomorrow night," I replied. "At 8 o'clock. Right in the middle of the birthday party." I want him surrounded by his friends, his colleagues, and his mistress when the hammer falls. I want the entire room to watch him lose everything. I could hear the smile in Victoria's voice. Evelyn, you continue to surprise me. I will have the papers sent to a secure printer near your resort. Review them, sign them, and let me know when you are heading back to the city. The sheriff's deputies will be waiting for your signal. I hung up the phone and closed my laptop. The healing process had officially begun. I was no longer the sad, betrayed wife hiding in the mountains. I was the architect of my husband's absolute ruin, and I was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Victoria was handling the legal execution, but evicting a man from a 20-acre estate during a massive party requires logistical supremacy. I needed boots on the ground. I needed someone inside the house who was loyal strictly to me, someone who could ensure that when the trap snapped shut, Richard had absolutely no avenue of escape. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Marcus. Marcus was the head of security for the estate. He was a retired military police officer who had worked for my father for 15 years before I inherited the property. He was a man of very few words, fiercely loyal to my family, and he possessed a deep, barely concealed contempt for my husband. Richard frequently treated Marcus like a glorified valet, barking orders at him and complaining about the security protocols. Marcus endured the disrespect silently, but I knew he was just waiting for a reason to push back. I was about to give him the ultimate reason. Marcus answered the phone immediately. Good morning, Ms. Evelyn. I thought you were at the spa this weekend. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Marcus, I said, leaning back in my chair. But I need a full logistical update on the property. What is the current situation at the manor? There was a brief silence on the line. I assume you are referring to the invasion of event planners currently setting up a dance floor on the rear patio? So he did not cancel them, I murmured, more to myself than to him. No, ma'am, Marcus replied, his tone perfectly flat. Mr. Richard informed me that he is hosting a corporate dinner tomorrow evening. He demanded that the security team deactivate the perimeter alarms for the duration of the event and requested that all household staff remain entirely out of sight. He explicitly told the groundskeepers that he did not want them ruining the aesthetic for his guests. The arrogance was almost impressive. He was not just throwing a party, he was actively hiding the people who actually maintained the property so he could play the role of the self-made billionaire. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute authority. The event tomorrow is not a corporate dinner. It is a birthday party for his mistress. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Marcus did not gasp, but the silence that followed was heavy with dangerous implication. Understood, he finally said, his voice cold and sharp. What are your orders? I am returning to the city tomorrow afternoon, I explained. I will be arriving at the estate at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, right in the middle of the party. I will have sheriff's deputies with me, and we will be executing an emergency eviction notice. It will be my absolute pleasure to assist the deputies, Marcus said smoothly. I need more than assistance, I continued. I need total control of the environment. At exactly 8:30, I need you to cycle the security system and change all the access codes for the main gates, the garage doors, and the front entrances. I want his biometric access completely scrubbed from the servers. Once he walks out of that door tomorrow night, he is never walking back in. Consider it done, Ms. Evelyn. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. Do not confront him before I arrive. Let him enjoy his party. Let him think he has completely won. When he feels the most powerful, the fall will hurt much worse. I hung up the phone with Marcus feeling a profound sense of tactical superiority. But there was one more alliance I needed to secure to ensure the financial trap was completely airtight. I found the phone number for the catering company listed on the invoice I had photographed in Richard's office. I dialed the number and asked to speak to the event coordinator for Saturday evening. A cheerful woman named Sarah answered the phone. "Thank you for calling Elite Catering. How can I help you?" "Hi Sarah, this is Evelyn, Richard's wife," I said, injecting a tone of bright, wealthy enthusiasm into my voice. "I know he is planning a surprise party for tomorrow night at our estate, and I just wanted to make sure everything was finalized regarding the payment. I know he wanted to put the final balance on his personal platinum card rather than our joint account." "Oh, yes, Mrs. Evelyn," Sarah replied eagerly, clearly thrilled to be speaking to the owner of the estate. "I have his platinum card ending in 4291 on file for the final $40,000 charge. We will be running the card tomorrow afternoon, right before the event begins, as per our standard policy." "Perfect," I smiled, though she could not see it. I just wanted to ensure the billing was correct. "Thank you, Sarah. The estate is looking forward to your team's arrival." I disconnected the call and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the mountain air. The pieces were not just on the board, they were locked into place. Victoria was freezing the joint accounts, which meant Richard's personal platinum card, which was linked directly to our shared wealth management portfolio, was about to be declined. He was going to owe $40,000 to a luxury catering company with absolutely no way to pay them. Marcus was securing the perimeter, ensuring that Richard's eviction would be absolute and permanent. I walked over to my travel bag and began folding my clothes. The spa weekend was over. The grief was over. I packed my bag with the meticulous precision of a soldier preparing for deployment. I had one final task before I left the mountains. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the garment bag I had brought with me. Inside was a stunning, floor-length designer gown in a deep, midnight blue. It was elegant, powerful, and intimidating. It was not the dress of a victim. It was the armor of a woman returning to reclaim her kingdom. Tomorrow night, Richard was going to host the party of a lifetime. And I was going to be the absolute center of attention. I left the mountain cabin shortly before noon on Friday. I did not check out at the front desk. I simply left the keycard on the table and drove away. My destination was not the city, but a small, unassuming law office in a neighboring town where Victoria had arranged for the legal documents to be securely printed and delivered. The drive was entirely different from my journey the day before. The crippling weight of the betrayal had been replaced by a driving, methodical energy. I was no longer a grieving wife fleeing her home. I was a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. I arrived at the law office just as a private courier was walking through the front doors holding a thick manila envelope. I intercepted him in the lobby, provided my identification, and carried the heavy package back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine turned off, and broke the seal on the envelope. Victoria Sterling had truly outdone herself. The documents were a masterpiece of legal destruction. There was the formal petition for divorce, outlining Richard's infidelity and his egregious violation of the prenuptial agreement. There was the financial injunction, a court-ordered mandate freezing all joint assets and prohibiting Richard from accessing any funds tied to the family trust. And then, there was the crown jewel. The emergency eviction notice. It was printed on heavy, watermarked paper bearing the imposing seal of the county court. Victoria had pulled every string she had to get a judge to sign off on an immediate, involuntary removal. The document cited unauthorized commercial activity, the attempted housing of an unapproved resident, and the severe financial liability Richard had exposed the estate to by hiring a massive catering company without authorization. The wording was lethal. It gave him precisely 0 hours to vacate the premises upon being served. He would be allowed to leave with the clothes on his back and nothing else. The rest of his belongings would be packed by my security team and shipped to an address of his choosing at a later date. I pulled a pen from my purse and signed my name on the designated lines. My signature was firm, steady, and completely devoid of hesitation. But as I looked at the signed eviction notice, I realized that legal documents, while powerful, lack visual impact. A piece of paper with a judge's signature would force Richard out of the house, but it would not explain the situation to his 60 guests. If I simply had him escorted out by the sheriff, he could spin a narrative later. He could claim I was crazy, that I had lost my mind and thrown him out over a misunderstanding. I needed physical, undeniable proof of his hypocrisy to present to the audience he had so carefully gathered. I needed the guests to understand exactly what they were participating in. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat and connected my phone. I accessed the encrypted folder where I had stored the security footage of Richard and Chloe from the previous month. I scrolled through the videos, pausing at the most damning moments, and took high-resolution screenshots. I captured a crystal-clear image of Chloe wearing my silk robe, twirling in the upstairs hallway. I captured an image of Richard pouring her wine from my grandfather's decanter in the formal dining room. And finally, I captured a perfectly framed shot of the two of them kissing passionately on the imported tile of the solarium. I drove to a local high-end print shop in the town center. I requested that the 3 images be printed on premium, glossy photo paper. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow when the images came off the printer, but he wisely said nothing as he handed them to me. I purchased 60 heavy, black envelopes from the stationery aisle of the shop. I sat in a small cafe next door, ordered an espresso, and spent the next hour methodically placing one set of the 3 photographs into each black envelope. I sealed them with a gold foil sticker, making them look exactly like luxury party favors. Richard wanted to host a corporate dinner. He wanted to impress his colleagues and his superiors at the marketing firm by pretending to be the master of a massive estate. Now, every single one of his guests was going to leave with a very special souvenir. They were going to open these elegant black envelopes and find undeniable photographic evidence that their host was a fraud, a thief, and an adulterer who had funded their champagne with his wife's stolen money. I stacked the 60 envelopes neatly into a leather tote bag and placed them in the trunk of my car, right next to the garment bag holding my midnight blue gown. The evidence was gathered. The legal weapons were loaded. The logistical trap was set. I checked into a generic business hotel on the outskirts of the city to spend the night. I did not want to return to the estate early and risk Richard seeing me. I needed to remain entirely invisible until the exact moment the party reached its peak. I laid in the hotel bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling an absolute, terrifying calm. I was not nervous. I was not sad. I was simply waiting for the clock to run out. Saturday arrived with a slow, creeping tension. I spent the morning in my hotel room on the outskirts of the city, carefully organizing my timeline. The catering company was scheduled to arrive at the estate at 2 in the afternoon to begin setting up the dance floor and the champagne towers. The guests were scheduled to arrive at 7. And I was scheduled to arrive at exactly 8, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies. At 3 in the afternoon, my cell phone vibrated on the hotel nightstand. The caller ID flashed Richard's name. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression even though he could not see me, and answered the call. "Hello, sweetheart," his voice boomed through the speaker, carrying that familiar, effortless charm. "How is the spa treating you? Are you finally relaxing?" "I am," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and soft. "I just finished a massage. It is very peaceful up here. How are things at the house?" Richard let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "Oh, you know me. Just holding down the fort. It is incredibly quiet here without you. I am just sitting in the solarium with a book, enjoying a boring Saturday afternoon." As he spoke, I could hear a faint, metallic clinking sound in the background. It sounded exactly like someone stacking 50 crystal champagne flutes on a metal serving tray. "What is that noise?" I asked innocently. Richard did not miss a beat. "Oh, that? I have the television on in the other room. I was watching a documentary about restaurants. Anyway, I just wanted to call and check on you. I know you were so stressed out with the foundation audit this week. You really need to learn how to disconnect, Evelyn. You carry too much weight on your shoulders." The audacity of his manipulation was staggering. He was standing in my house, watching a team of luxury caterers set up a $40,000 party for his 20-something mistress, and he was using the opportunity to gaslight me about my work ethic. He wanted me to feel grateful for his concern while he actively dismantled my life. "You are right, Richard," I said softly. "I am lucky to have you looking out for me." His ego practically expanded through the phone line. "That is what husbands are for. I just want you to be happy. You stay up there and enjoy the peace and quiet. Do not rush back tomorrow. Take your time. The estate is perfectly safe with me." "I will see you tomorrow, Richard," I said. "I love you," he replied smoothly. I disconnected the call and set the phone down on the bed. My hands were perfectly steady. He thought he was a mastermind. He thought he had completely outsmarted the quiet, boring wife who spent her days managing spreadsheets and charity dinners. He believed his own lies so entirely that he could not even conceive of the possibility that he was walking into a trap. I looked at the clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. It was time to get ready. I walked into the hotel bathroom and began the transformation. This was not about vanity, it was about psychological warfare. I needed to walk into my estate looking like the owner, the authority, and the executioner, all wrapped into one. I styled my hair in sleek, immaculate waves. I applied my makeup with sharp precision, avoiding the soft, natural look Richard usually preferred in favor of a bold, severe aesthetic. Deep red lipstick. Sharp eyeliner. Then, I unzipped the garment bag and stepped into the midnight blue designer gown. The heavy silk draped perfectly over my frame, the color so dark it almost looked black in the dim hotel lighting. It was a dress designed to command attention, to silence a room the moment the wearer walked through the door. I paired it with a pair of diamond earrings that had belonged to my mother and a pair of black stiletto heels. I looked in the full-length mirror. The woman who had cried in the mountain cabin 2 nights ago was completely gone. The exhausted foundation director Richard thought he had married was dead. The person staring back at me in the mirror was a force of nature, dressed in silk and diamonds, holding a manila envelope filled with legal destruction. I picked up the leather tote bag containing the 60 black envelopes, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of the hotel room. The drive to the estate took 30 minutes. I pulled into a small, abandoned parking lot about a half-mile down the road from the main gates of my property and waited. At exactly 7:45, a white police cruiser pulled into the lot and parked next to me. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped out. They were both tall, imposing men, and they looked at my evening gown with a mixture of confusion and respect. "Ms. Evelyn?" the older deputy asked, approaching my window. "We received the emergency eviction order from your attorney. We are ready to assist you in removing the unauthorized individual from your property." "Thank you, officers," I said, stepping out of my car and handing them a copy of the judge's order. "The individual's name is Richard. He is currently hosting an unauthorized event on the rear patio. I want you to follow me into the house, but I want you to remain just outside the patio doors until I signal you. I need to address the guests first." The deputies nodded, reviewing the paperwork. "Understood, ma'am. We will be right behind you." I got back into my car and started the engine. The sun had completely set. The trap was armed. It was time to go home. I drove my car up to the imposing iron gates of the estate at exactly 7:55. I did not need to press the intercom button or enter my access code. Marcus was standing in the guardhouse, watching the monitors. As soon as my headlights illuminated the driveway, the heavy gates swung open silently. The police cruiser followed me up the winding, tree-lined path. We parked near the massive detached garage, out of sight from the main house. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the heavy silk of my midnight blue gown, and picked up the leather tote bag. Marcus walked out of the shadows to meet me. He was wearing a dark suit, his earpiece glowing faintly in the night. "Good evening, Ms. Evelyn," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The perimeter is secure. I have already scrubbed his biometric access from the system. The moment you give the word, he is locked out permanently. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Where is he right now? He is currently on the rear patio, Marcus replied. The jazz band is playing, and he is giving a toast to the young lady. However, there is a slight disruption occurring. The catering manager pulled him aside about 2 minutes ago. It appears there is an issue with his payment method. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. Victoria had executed the financial freeze perfectly. Richard was currently standing in front of 60 of his most important colleagues, trying to explain to a caterer why his platinum card was bouncing like a rubber check. Let us go, I said. I walked toward the side entrance of the house, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the stone pathway. The 2 sheriff's deputies followed closely behind me, their presence an imposing, silent threat in the darkness. We entered the house through the kitchen. The catering staff was rushing around in a chaotic blur, pulling trays of appetizers from the massive industrial ovens. They barely noticed me walking through in a ball gown, assuming I was simply a guest who had wandered inside to find a bathroom. I paused in the hallway just before the glass doors that led out to the rear patio. The deputies stopped behind me, standing in the shadows of the corridor. I looked through the glass. The patio had been completely transformed. There was a glowing, custom-built dance floor, crystal chandeliers suspended from the wooden pergolas, and dozens of people dressed in expensive cocktail attire. And right in the center of the patio, standing next to a massive, 5-tier birthday cake, was Richard. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, and looking completely panicked. Standing next to him was Chloe. She was wearing a tight, sparkling silver dress, looking confused and slightly embarrassed as Richard engaged in a heated, hushed argument with Sarah, the catering manager. I cannot process the payment, sir, Sarah was saying, her voice carrying slightly over the sound of the jazz band. The card has been declined by the issuer. I need another form of payment immediately, or my staff will begin packing up the food. This is ridiculous. Richard hissed, his face flushing dark red. He was desperately trying to keep his voice down so his colleagues would not hear him. It is a platinum card. There is no limit. Your machine must be broken. Run it again. I have run it 3 times, sir, Sarah replied, crossing her arms defensively. It is a hard decline. I will call my wealth manager on Monday and have you fired for incompetence. Richard spat, his arrogance flaring up to cover his panic. Do you know who I am? Do you know whose house you are standing in? I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the patio. The cool night air hit my face, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Actually, Sarah, I said, my voice cutting through the jazz music like a razor blade. He does not own this house. And he does not have a wealth manager anymore. The entire patio went dead silent. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing, the saxophone letting out a squeak as the musician lowered his instrument in shock. 60 heads turned simultaneously to look at me. Richard froze. All the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost in a tuxedo. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Evelyn? He finally managed to croak, taking a step backward and almost knocking into the birthday cake. What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the spa. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made Chloe instinctively shrink behind him. I finished my massage early, Richard. I decided I did not want to miss the corporate dinner you were hosting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several of Richard's senior partners at the marketing firm exchanged confused glances. Corporate dinner? One of them whispered to his wife. I thought this was his girlfriend's birthday party. I walked slowly down the steps, the heavy silk of my gown gliding across the stone. I moved through the crowd of guests, unzipping my leather tote bag. I pulled out a handful of the heavy, black envelopes sealed with gold foil. I am so glad you all could make it to my estate, I announced to the crowd, my voice projecting clearly across the silent patio. As the actual owner of this property, I wanted to ensure that every single one of you left with a special party favor. A token of appreciation for celebrating my husband's complete lack of integrity. I handed an envelope to a senior partner. I handed another to the head of human resources at Richard's firm. I moved through the crowd with methodical precision, distributing the elegant black envelopes to the most important people in his professional life. Richard lunged forward, panic completely taking over his features. "Evelyn, stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "What are you doing? Give me those." He reached out to grab my arm. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply raised my left hand and snapped my fingers. The heavy glass doors of the patio swung open violently. The two imposing sheriff's deputies stepped out of the shadows and walked directly toward Richard, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. "Sir," the older deputy barked, his voice echoing across the silent patio. "Step away from the lady. Right now." Richard froze instantly at the sound of the deputy's voice. His hands fell to his sides, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He looked at the two uniformed officers, then looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. The guests were no longer whispering. The silence on the patio was absolute, broken only by the sound of heavy paper tearing as 60 of Richard's closest colleagues opened their black envelopes. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I watched as the senior partner of the marketing firm pulled out the glossy photograph of Richard pouring wine for Chloe from my grandfather's decanter, followed by the high-resolution shot of them kissing in the solarium. The partner's face twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked up at Richard. "You told us you owned this estate," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You told us your wife was a terrible, unsupportive woman who was dragging you down. You asked me to evaluate you for a promotion based on your integrity and your management skills." The senior partner dropped the photographs onto the stone patio. "I think we have seen enough of your management skills, Richard. Do not bother coming into the office on Monday. Your keycard will be deactivated." Richard let out a strangled cry. "Sir, please, let me explain. It is not what it looks like. She is crazy." He took a step toward the partner, but the older sheriff's deputy immediately stepped between them. The deputy pulled a folded, watermarked document from his utility belt and pressed it hard into Richard's chest. "Richard Thomas," the deputy said loudly. "You have been served with an emergency court-ordered eviction notice, signed by a county judge. You are trespassing on private property. You have exactly 0 minutes to vacate the premises. If you do not begin walking toward the front gates immediately, you will be placed in handcuffs and forcibly removed." Richard stared at the paper in his hands. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, the realization finally crashing down on him. He was losing his job. He was losing his house. And he was standing in front of the woman he had tried to replace, who was looking at him with the cold, detached interest of a scientist observing an insect. "Evelyn, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "Please do not do this. Not in front of everyone. Let us go inside and talk about this. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. "You do not love me, Richard. You love the lifestyle I provided for you. But the lifestyle is no longer available." Chloe, who had been hiding behind the birthday cake, suddenly stepped forward. Her face was flushed, and she looked at me with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You cannot do this to him," she shrieked. "You are being cruel." I turned my gaze to her. She looked incredibly small in her sparkling silver dress. "I am not being cruel, Chloe," I said softly. "I am being precise. You wanted to play the role of the lady of the manor. Well, congratulations. The manor is now throwing you out. I suggest you follow him out the gates, assuming you still want him now that he is unemployed and homeless." Chloe's mouth snapped shut. She looked at Richard, looked at the police officers, and then turned and sprinted off the patio, her heels clicking rapidly toward the driveway. She did not look back. Richard collapsed onto his knees, dropping the eviction notice onto the stone floor. He began to sob, heavy, ugly tears streaming down his face, ruining his custom tuxedo. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Marcus, as I said, turning to the head of security who had just stepped out onto the patio. Please escort Mr. Thomas off my property. With pleasure, ma'am, Marcus rumbled. He walked over, grabbed Richard by the collar of his tuxedo, and hauled him to his feet. Come along, sir. Your time here is finished. The deputies flanked them as Marcus Frog marched my sobbing, ruined husband through the crowd of disgusted guests, through the side gate, and down the long driveway toward the main road. I turned to the catering manager, who was standing frozen near the bar. Sarah, I said gently. Please pack up the food and bill my family trust for the inconvenience. You and your staff are free to go. Within 30 minutes, the estate was completely empty. The guests had fled to their cars, the caterers had packed their equipment, and the jazz band had silently slipped out the back door. I stood alone on the rear patio, looking out at the dark, silent pine forest. The air was cold and clean. The estate belonged to me again. This concludes the story of Evelyn and Richard. For those listening, here are the vital lessons from this story. First, the fatal flaw of arrogance. Narcissists constantly confuse silence with ignorance. They believe that if you are not screaming and throwing things, you are blind to their actions. They underestimate quiet people, leaving behind massive trails of evidence because they fundamentally believe they are too smart to ever get caught. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake fueled by their own ego. Second, the strategic power of silence. Anger is an emotional reaction. Silence is a calculated strategy. Pretending everything is normal gives you the critical time needed to secure your boundaries and build an airtight case while the betrayer thinks they have already won. By the time they realize you are fighting back, the war is already over. And finally, the necessity of financial vigilance. Romance should never blind you to legal liability. Your sanctuary must be protected by your own vigilance. Never let a partner's ambition or entitlement jeopardize the financial foundation you built. Thank you for tuning in to Quiet Karma Stories. If you enjoyed this masterclass in slow burn revenge, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what you would have done if you found that catering bill. See you in the next story.